Welcome to The Mything Link, a podcast where we explore the undercurrent of mythology that links our modern culture to our ancient stories.
We're your hosts, Dr. Caitlin
and Dr. Randall,
two professional mythologists who share a passion for music,
a proclivity for all things spooky,
and an insatiable curiosity for the world around us.
The show will cover worldwide mythology, and season 1 will focus on ancient Greek stories,
giving listeners everything they need to know to understand the new Netflix series Chaos,
and most likely several things that they don't. Join us as we talk, laugh, and sing this fall for The Mything Link season 1.
Chaos
Theory. You can link that up. It's appropriately chaotic. This whole situation is appropriately chaotic. Maybe that's it. It's a lesson in chaos. Perfect.
It's a lesson in chaos theory.
Hey everyone, welcome to The Mything Link. This week we are looking at the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. And I know we made some big promises last week about recording this episode together in person. And I'm very happy to announce that while Caitlin was visiting San Diego and we were in person together, we maximized all of our time together by hanging out and doing things that we aren't able to do when we're in different states. So here we are recording separately again.
I have no regrets.
No regrets. We had a blast and we did work on other aspects of the podcast together. Other things we'll be announcing hopefully soon that we have cooking currently. So today we're looking at Orpheus and Eurydice. So exciting. On Chaos, Eurydice is played by Aurora Perrineau.
And Orpheus is played by Killian Scott.
Yes, he is.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah, he is.
You're right, he is, Randall.
Yeah, he is. So one of the main source texts of the Orpheus and Eurydice story comes to us again from Ovid's Metamorphoses. And once again, we're using for this episode the Alan Mandelbaum translation, and we will list it in our show notes. It's the first story in book 10 and the first story in book 11. Book 10, it's the story of Orpheus and Eurydice, and book 11 is the story of Orpheus's death. And if you're reading through Ovid's Metamorphoses, just remember that in this book, they use the Roman names of all the gods. And unless we're reading a direct quote, we're typically in the show going to be using the Greek names of all the figures. So the storyus of Orpheus.
The storyus of Orphe.
The storyus. Shit, I did it again. The story of Orpheus and Eurydice starts one day where the young lovers are to be wed by one of the gods, no less. And when he comes, did he come celebrating and bringing all his joy and love for the young couple on their wedding day? The day of their wedding? No, he didn't. Instead, all he brought was sadness and bad omens.
No joy, no hope, no grace. Even the torch he held kept sputtering. Eyes teared and smarted from the smoke. No flame, however much he shook that brand would blaze. So this is the god who came to marry Orpheus and Eurydice. Fast forward a little bit, not that long, however.
Some say on that very day that she was wed, Eurydice stepped on a viper. It bit her in the foot and she died immediately. Ovid is unclear of exactly when it happens, just that she was in the newlywed period.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that some academics interpret this because it says the bride just wed met death, for even as she crossed the meadows with her naiad friends, she stepped upon a snake. The viper sank its teeth into her ankle. Some people take that to interpret that she died on her wedding day. And Orpheus was so sad. Orpheus wept and pleaded and begged with the gods and basically said, I get it, everybody dies, but this was not fair. She was taken too soon. And I respect you. I respect everything that's going on here, but this is not fair. You need to give her a little bit more time.
Right.
And so he goes on a quest.
Right. because no matter how much he mourns and how much he plays his music, and no matter how many rocks and trees and creatures are enthralled by his beautiful music playing during his grieving process, not even his transcendental music can bring his new bride back to life. Despite music being powerful and magical and something that's beyond mortality, it doesn't have the power to contradict fate. It doesn't have the power to raise the dead. So Orpheus, he decides that instead of grieving and moving on from Eurydice's death, he decides that he's going to descend via the cave to the underworld. And so he passes through the ghosts and wades through the shades in order to present himself to Persephone and Hades. Once he gets and is standing in front of Hades and Persephone, he takes out his lyre and he sings to them of his deep love for his newly deceased wife. He says, "Love, a god all-powerful with us who dwell on earth, and if old traditions say true, not less so here." So he's appealing to the fact that love doesn't die. Love is not something that's bound to mortality. It's also something that those who have passed on feel, and something that exists in the underworld and the afterlife. And he's saying to them, if he can't return to life with Eurydice, then he's going to remain here in the underworld. So not only will she have died, he will have died as well.
Right. And I really like the way that Ovid phrases his plea. In this version, Orpheus is acknowledging that death is natural and that all humans should be taken by death. And of course, Orpheus is typically portrayed as a mortal and an incredible musician. And he specifically says to Hades and Persephone, "For all of us are yours to rule by right. Our stay above is brief. When that is done, we all must, sooner or later, speed to one same dwelling place. We all shall take this way. Our final home is here. The human race must here submit to your unending sway." And he goes on to say that, like, I agree that Eurydice's soul belongs to you, but just not yet. Right. And every human who has experienced loss really has had that feeling and that thought. It's a really relatable place to be in. And the gods thought it was relatable too.
It says that it was so relatable that Orpheus's gut-wrenching song and music, that even the ghosts shed tears, that Sisyphus stopped pushing his rock and sat upon it to listen to Orpheus' pleading song.
In Ovid, it says, "It's even said that moved by Orpheus's song, the Furies wept. The only tears the Furies ever shed. Nor could Persephone, nor he himself, the ruler of the lower world, refuse the plea of Orpheus of Eurydice." And so in the classical myth, it's both Hades and Persephone who are moved by the musician's plea, and they call Eurydice forward, and she's still limping because she still feels the pain of the wound of the viper in her foot, which is kind of rough. Like, you're still in pain in the underworld. That's a rough, grim view. Not ideal. And so Eurydice comes up, and Hades and Persephone basically tell Orpheus, okay, here's the deal. Like, you've moved us with your plea. You're allowed to leave with Eurydice, and she will follow you. But if you stop and look back behind you at her, then she'll be doomed to stay here forever.
Right.
And they had to climb this dark, steep path out of the underworld. It was precarious. It was difficult. It was misty. It was hard to see. It was hard to hear. It was everything uncomfortable, right? The underworld journey is supposed to be very uncomfortable. And there are different versions. And in Ovid, it says, "But at last they'd almost reached the upper world when he, afraid that she might disappear again and longing so to see her, turned to gaze back at his wife. At once she slipped away and down. His arms stretched out convulsively to clasp and to be clasped in turn, but there was nothing but the unresisting air. And as she died again, Eurydice did not reproach her husband. How could she have faulted him except to say that he loved her indeed? One final faint farewell, so weak it scarcely reached his ears, was all she said. Then back to the abyss she fell."
Orpheus tries to follow her, and he can't. He's denied passage by the boatsman Charon. to go back into the underworld for a second time. And so for 7 days and 7 nights, Orpheus wanders and lingers about the brink of the underworld, that cave we talked about, refusing food and water, just singing his dour songs of complaint to the world. The rocks and the trees and the animals and everybody around him is just moved by the utter despair and sadness of his song. And he, in this time, the Maenads of Dionysus are making advances towards him. He's this incredibly talented, attractive, popular musician, and women are interested, is what the text tells us. And Orpheus is just so captivated by Eurydice and the longing to have her back that he is not available for these women. He's not available to give them the time of day. He's not available to consider anything with them, and they take great insult at this. And if we remember what we talked about with the Maenads of Dionysus in previous episodes, they're very frenzied, fanatical women. And so when they have been insulted by Orpheus like this, it's not going to bode well for him.
Yeah, it definitely takes on like a Narcissus quality to the story, I think, right? Like the lover scorned because there's no space in his heart for anyone but Eurydice. Orpheus reminds me of those like old-timey love stories of people who have been married for like 80 years and they'll never date anybody else and they die at the same time, right? Like he gives off that kind of energy that's the life he longs for and the life that he wants, but the life he's not destined to have.
Right.
Oh man, we're talking about tragedy again.
It's true.
So tragic. So what happens to Orpheus?
The Maenads take great insult to Orpheus not having any room in his heart for even just like a sexual encounter. And so they basically are so frenzied and upset by this notion that they tear Orpheus apart limb from limb. They go into this violent frenzy and tear him to pieces with their bare hands, flinging him all over the place, like in different parts of the country. They throw his head in one place and his lyre into a different kind of river, and he is like just spread all over. Calliope, his mother, and the rest of the muses gather up the pieces of Orpheus and they bury them. And Zeus eventually places his lyre among the stars, which is the Lyra constellation. That's where it is said to have originated from, is Zeus placing Orpheus' lyre into the sky. The too long didn't read is that Orpheus dies, and he's once more able to appropriately enter the underworld this time and embrace Eurydice, and it's said that they wander happily through the fields of Asphodel, gazing at each other all of the time for all of eternity.
And I love how Ovid says, and there they walk together now. At times they are side by side. At times she walks ahead with him behind. At other times it's Orpheus who leads. But without any need to fear should he turn around to see his own Eurydice. And like they're finally together, they're finally equal, they're finally on a level playing field, and maybe only in death is Orpheus able to fully see Eurydice. Orpheus is often associated with the lyre because he is a musician, and a lyre is an ancient Greek harp, and it's kind of U-shaped with the strings running vertically, and there's like kind of like a bar across the top of the U to keep the strings taut. And you'll see artistic depictions of ancient Greek mythology oftentimes with characters playing the lyre. It's a very, very common symbol that is not played too much anymore. I know in some parts of the African continent it is still played, and it's associated with Orpheus because that was his main instrument. Is it what they use in Harry Potter? Are you a big Potter?
No, I only seen them once.
Okay. There's a scene in Harry Potter where to gain entrance to the Chamber of Secrets, he has to get past a giant three-headed
Fluffy
dog.
Which is funny because technically Cerberus means spot in Greek, like ancient Greek. So that's like one of my favorite fun facts. Like fucking Hades, the Lord of the Dead, names his terrifying three-headed dog Spot.
That's so cute. That's so cute. And we'll talk more about cerebellum.
Cerebellum.
Cerebellum. We'll talk.
Lady Antebellum.
You know they changed their name to Lady A so they'd be less racist. We can't even go down this path. This
Okay,
is too big of a
going
path
back
to
to
trod.
going back to the Chamber of Secrets. I'll show you the Chamber of Secrets.
What does somebody have to do to gain entry to your Chamber of Secrets? Would playing a liar work?
Depends on if they're nice to me or not, also. But yes.
So yeah,
Would it
so they
work for
definitely
you?
have to be mean to me. And also play music.
God, we both love a toxic fuckboy.
We love a fuckboy.
We do love a fuckboy.
Yeah, so in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, we see a nod to the Orpheus myth, where Harry Potter descends below Hogwarts into the Chamber of Secrets, into the underworld, and his first task, his first boss, the first boss he meets is Fluffy, the three-headed dog who guards the gate. Who guards the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets. Yeah, it is the first boss he has to defeat is getting past Fluffy. And in order to do so, he plays music because music puts Fluffy right to sleep. And that's the secret. Actually, when he gets there, Fluffy is already asleep because there's music playing.
Don't they go and Fluffy's awake, and then when they go back after the ogre, Fluffy's asleep?
Fluffy's asleep because somebody else got in there first. Professor Quirrell. Oh no spoilers. We got to stop spoiling all the Harry Potter.
I didn't see them till last year, and I still never read them.
The books are definitely better, and there's a ton of Greek mythology in them.
The queer community is protesting J.K. Rowling because she's horribly transphobic and queerphobic, which is really tragic.
And it's extra interesting because she wrote a whole storyline about how Polyjuice Potion,
right,
and how obviously Hermione was a cat, but she was still Hermione inside.
Right.
The outside didn't reflect her insides. She understands the concept. So in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, we see a nod to the Orpheus story with the three-headed dog Fluffy, who goes to sleep when music is played, which brings us to the interpretation of the story in Chaos, where, spoiler alert, kind of, the story doesn't go the same way in Chaos as it does in classical mythology, but still it involves Orpheus finally seeing Eurydice and finally understanding how to meet her where she's at and how to love her. And what I really loved about what Chaos did with this story is they let Orpheus and Eurydice's love last a long time. By the time they're introduced in the story, they're married, they're living together. He's released multiple albums. The luster of their relationship has faded. And now what we have are two people who are wholly incompatible with each other and basically only have these big expressions of love and are missing out on those micro moments of what true partnership is. And gosh, I really related with a lot of Riddies, and in Chaos they call Eurydice Riddy, which I think is a fun nickname for her. They show Riddy just being heartbroken because she has so much love for Orpheus. She just doesn't know. She's finally at the point where she needs to prioritize the love for herself, right? How she loves herself and how she feels like she needs to be loved instead of the way that Orpheus is loving her. And in Chaos, we see the tragedy of two people who neither one is bad or wrong. They're just wrong for each other. And they're still just trying to find each other this whole time. And, getting a little bit emotional. There's one point in Chaos where the narrator, Prometheus, says something along the lines of there's no loneliness quite like when you're falling out of love with somebody who doesn't realize it yet. And it's just the heartbreak in the mundane of the everyday life of existing in a dance with a partner you're no longer compatible with, I think is something that Chaos was able to show us really, really, really well. And using the story of Orpheus and Eurydice to do that was a little bit unexpected to me. That's not traditionally part of their story. What is part of their story is that Eurydice doesn't have a voice. And that is something that Chaos really explored.
In Ovid's tale, Eurydice isn't even named until halfway through Orpheus's song that he's presenting to Persephone and Hades. Prior to that, she's just referred to as his wife, part of a newlywed couple, the bride just wed, met death, for even as she crossed the meadows. We don't know that her name is Eurydice until a number of lines later when she's just an aside. It's an M dash that says of Eurydice. She's finally named partially through Orpheus's song. So something that I've really honed in on about this story is that this is Orpheus's story. As Ovid is telling it, as Bullfinch tells it, as most of these places will find this myth, it is Orpheus's story. This is not Orpheus and Eurydice's story, as it's titled. This is Orpheus's story. And she never talks. Throughout the entirety of this myth about Orpheus, Eurydice says, I think maybe one word, if that.
I don't know. I don't think she says anything.
I don't think she says anything either, but I didn't know if I was just being dramatic about that.
Oh, she says one final faint farewell, so we could scarcely reach his ears.
So even the one word she says is fading away. And something that I wrote in my notes is that Eurydice is a shade far before she dies. She is literally just an aside in this story of Orpheus. And I'm getting chills thinking about it. We don't get to know in Ovid's version what Eurydice wants. Does she want to marry Orpheus? How does she want to be loved? Does she want to stay in the underworld? Does she want to come back? Nobody seems to give a shit whether or not she wants to stay dead or go back to being alive. And so something that I really loved about Chaos was that Chaos is Riddy's story. It is Riddy who is going to bring down the gods with two other mortals, like two other not cis-het men mortals. Eurydice is the one saying, I need to leave. I need to prioritize loving myself. I am the one who feels offended by the gods. And I just loved the perspective of them giving her the voice to be this powerful woman. You know, it's just really
like agency, right?
Yeah.
And
it's
agency,
really beautiful.
when we talk about literature, is the ability to make your own decisions and the ability to basically like move the plot forward as a character.
Mm-hmm.
And so often we see in literature and mythology that female characters lack agency. They're just kind of at the whim of the male characters
Mm-hmm.
around them. And this story is a perfect example. We have a woman who is unnamed. The only thing we know about her is her relationship to the man in the story. And like Caitlin said, it's his story. It's from his perspective. And I mean, gosh, the fact that we don't even go into the pain that Eurydice is in, her journey to the underworld after she died, what she thought of when she got there. And this is what Chaos explores. They give Riddy that agency and that voice, and they ask those questions, right? What if this was Eurydice's story?
Right.
What if she wasn't just the perfect muse wife to the musician, right? What if she's her own complete person who has something to say about the whole situation? Wow.
Right.
Who'd have thunk it?
And I think Chaos really gets at that, because you see the base myth of this being Orpheus trying to make this his story, that she's his muse, and her saying no, her reclaiming, no, this is not, I'm not your muse. This is my story. No longer is she a silent, passive prize in Orpheus's story, which is usually the feminist beef that people have with this myth. And there's a lot of different interpretations of when Orpheus looks back. Ovid is not the only one to tell this myth. Obviously, it's thousands of years old, and it's been retold and told over and over again. And there's understandings of Orpheus looking back to make sure that Eurydice is still there as a challenge to what little autonomy she has. Like, if she has any at all, this is a patriarchal distrust of her presence, like an assertion of patriarchal control and a form of possessiveness over her. It's a need for Orpheus to reassert his control over the situation by confirming that she's still there, because he doesn't trust that she's still there. And something that's bothersome about this myth is that her fate is determined by Orpheus's choices here, rather than her own actions. It is not anything that she's done or says or feels that changes the way that this story unfolds. She goes back to the underworld because of what Orpheus chooses. She leaves and then goes back because of what he's done.
Because of his decisions. And they tell us that when he gets there, she's in pain. And then she has to die again. It doesn't just say that she gets left there left behind.
Right.
Like she has to go through the process of death again. And in Greek mythology, the underworld is, and we'll get to this in our episode on the underworld, but it's a layered physical place with many different, how do you say that? Like geographical features.
Sure.
Right? Like it's a huge
Plains.
landscape. Yeah, there's the river Styx, there's mountains, there's valleys, there's the fields of asphodel, like right,
Tartarus. Right.
There are so many different places that we could see this as a very arduous physical journey, and chaos shows us some of that. This isn't a thing like where they go to walk out the door and he looks behind and she has to stay back.
Right.
Like this is a violent, physical, arduous process for both of them. So in ancient Greece, it was common belief that in order to enter the underworld, you have to pay a toll to cross the river Styx. And you have to pay this toll in a very like literal physical way. And so folks would be buried in ancient Greek culture with a coin in their mouth to pay the passage, to pay their fare for this passage. Otherwise, their spirit wouldn't be able to cross through the underworld.
Right. Because Charon wouldn't ferry you across the river Styx unless you had some form of payment, which Chaos nails on the head.
It's interesting. Chaos does nail it on the head that you can't move on if you don't have your coin, but they allow her to get on the ferry across the river first. So that like kind of bothered me.
Me too. Oh my God. I was like, wait a minute. She shouldn't have been allowed to get on the boat in the first place.
I was like, wait a minute. What do you mean she doesn't have the coin? She's like already here. Like she shouldn't.
No, they're like, no, you can't go through the hole.
Right. You can't go through the frame. So the frame is something that exists from our research purely in chaos, in the world of chaos. That's not something that comes to us from Greek mythology. But the idea that souls would cross over or have some sort of reincarnation is supported in facets of ancient Greek culture.
So we see that ritual of the coin in the mouth in the scene at Eurydice's funeral, and we see Orpheus go up to her casket and slyly take that coin out of her mouth and put it in his pocket. And the internet chatters that Orpheus made the right decision in taking her coin to keep her from moving on because it gave her more time to bring down the fall of the gods or whatever.
Well, right. It's fated. She can't work against her fate, right?
Right. But it bothers me. I think that's nonsense. You can't say that Orpheus made the right choice in denying her autonomy and what she's deserved to move on.
No, we don't have to say it's the right choice, but we can say that it's the choice that Orpheus was always going to make.
Right, but the internet thinks that Orpheus made the right choice, and that language, I think, is bothersome and nonsense.
That's fair. Well, and that's something we've talked about value judgments on the show before, and how they're typically not very helpful. And this is a case where they're making a value judgment, right? Something's not inherently good or bad, right or wrong.
It's fate.
Yeah, but when we zoom out, like it's fate in this scenario. There's no... Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's just fate is what it is. The best description I've heard about fate not being right or wrong or good or evil is the idea that what's best for the lion is chaos for the antelope. Or wait, no. Right. So whatever that is. Or what's normal for the spider is chaos for the fly.
Yeah, nature's not inherently good or bad. It just is. You can't say that nature is evil for creating a wave or having beasts like a lion eat the antelope. It is literally just the circle of life.
Okay, Mufasa, tell me more.
I mean, it's me. It's me as a person who decides it's really sad when the hawk eats my chickens. But the reason that I won't put up barbed wire or have an electric fence is because it's nature. The fox was there first. It's not the fox's fault for eating my chicken when it was hungry. I'm just sad and mad at the fox in that moment because culturally, personally, morally, ethically, because of my response to how I was raised and what's around me and the values that I've created for myself in response to my culture, I'm sad about my chicken dying. You know, I have friends who grew up in Pakistan that are like, I do not understand why your chickens have names because they're food. And I'm like, you know, it's just different culturally. It's not wrong or right. I mean, I'm not going to let them eat my chicken, right? Like, go find your own chicken to eat. But like, it is what it is. I can't say Pakistani people are evil because they eat chickens, right? Like, that's not okay. I mean, put a value judgment on it. I eat chicken too, right?
Right.
And it's like value judgments are culturally constructed.
Mm-hmm. And that's why we need to talk about cultural relativism. So this is like a big, huge definition I give most of my students right at the beginning of the semester, is that we can only judge something using the cultural values from the culture that it came from, right? So I can't sit here as an American and say that someone in Sweden is wrong for the way that they approach things. Is it wrong in the context of Swedish society, or is it seen as bad or deviant in the context of that society? That's a different conversation, right? Like, we have different layers of privilege and morality and understanding of ethics and religious views and all sorts of things. Like, basically the only constant in humanity is to be different, have a different cultural context.
Which is why I'm going to be offended at Ovid's telling of this story, because I am a passionate feminist and think Eurydice should have talked, whereas it might not necessarily have bothered Ovid, right?
Right. Yeah. And we have to acknowledge that, of course, with everything, we're coming at this from our own cultural perspective. And our perspective as women who live in the United States in 2024 is that the woman should be included in the story, and her perspective matters. And it's true, some people are main characters and some are side characters, absolutely. But we're in an era now where it's okay for everybody to have main character energy, right? And if you're not the main character of your own life, then what are you doing in someone else's story, right? Like, I also want to bring up that we have a similar story to the Orpheus myth in the Christian, Hebrew Christian Bible. Is it included in the Quran? I don't know.
It's in Genesis, so that's the Torah, which makes me think maybe yes.
I think Genesis is in the Quran as well. So in Genesis, in the Hebrew Bible, we have the story of Lot and his wife, and that has very similar themes to the story of Orpheus and Eurydice, even down to the way that we say the title of it, Lot and his wife. Did his wife have a name?
Nope. I mean, there's some versions of, Midrash where she has a name, but...
Perfect. Yeah. So basically, the story of Lot is that there's...
Good luck.
Fuck me, dude. This is... I know. Okay,
we don't have to get into it.
So basically, there's a story of the destruction of the city where this family lives, and they've been given warning by some angels about what's going to happen and that they need to get out. And since we're in Hebrew mythology and not Greek mythology, they believe the angels and they actually leave, which is great. But what happens is, while they're leaving, the whole entire family is told, don't stop and look back at the city as it's being destroyed. Otherwise, you will also be destroyed. And Lot's wife doesn't listen because she's a cheeky minx. And she stops and turns and looks at the destruction of her home and is instantly turned into a pillar of salt and flutters away in the breeze. And ancient astronaut theorists take this to believe that the town was destroyed by nuclear technology and that they had to run away really fast, and Lot's wife was vaporized because she lingered too close. But if she was close enough to get completely vaporized into ashes and her family could watch it happen, but they were fine, unclear. I can't speak on that. I don't know enough about nuclear technology. But there we have it.
Woo! I love that.
Was that a basic enough?
It was.
Summary of that story?
It was it was good. You did good. I would have been like, here's the history of Sodom and Gomorrah.
If you're interested in sodomy, do I have a story for you?
Check out Genesis 19, folks.
So if you'd like to learn more about the story of Lot and his wife, it is a not safe for work story. But it basically speaks to the idea that people should have so much faith in their religious systems, in their angels, in the messages of divine delivery, that they should be more attached to those than their attachment to their earthly possessions or to the material world or to the mortal world, essentially.
There's theological interpretations of this, that the idea here is that there's danger and destruction awaiting for those who look longingly back at the past or longingly back at their lives of sin. right? And I think that's a valid interpretation of Orpheus and Eurydice as well. There's danger in longing for the past for either yourself or for those around you, that only living for the past brings a sort of barrenness, a fading away, a turning into salt and blowing into the breeze. And biblically, salt is, it's associated as being a very vital part of survival and life in the Middle East, but it's also associated with barrenness, and you can't reuse salt once it's been used. Or, there's other biblical parables about the uselessness of used salt.
Interesting. And there's another Netflix show that explores this idea that I'm sure a lot of you have seen, called Black Mirror. And they have an episode in season 2. The season 2 premiere is called Be Right Back. And it explores the idea of utilizing someone's digital footprint to create a version of them after they die. So I see this definitely as a retelling of Orpheus and Eurydice and how unnatural and tragic that can be. It's a great episode. It's over 10 years old, but it's a great episode. It's one of the most powerful ones that I've seen, just the idea of grief. I lost my best friend when I was 21, my best friend from high school, in a car accident, and it was very sudden and very tragic. And it's something that I've been dealing with for, the past 15 years, and it pops up at different times. And this episode, it follows a woman. It's like a gender swapped Orpheus and Eurydice. Follows a woman whose boyfriend dies in a tragic car accident as well. And she is able to upload her email and text and his social media profiles and everything into the cloud. And she's able to text with him, and it analyzes all of the data. It's basically AI able to talk back to her in his voice. And she gets so wrapped up in it and caught up in it that she eventually orders like a robot version of him that's loaded with his personality. And then the story goes on to like, how does she continue to move on in the world and in her relationship with this virtual version of her boyfriend, and then move on with her grief when he's still sticking around. So I very much recommend it. It's a great episode that explores those questions.
The story of Orpheus and Eurydice points us to the painful reality, the tragic reality that death is irreversible. It can't be undone. And if we don't develop healthy coping mechanisms, if we don't put ourselves in community, if we don't grieve in the appropriate ways, it will literally lead to us being torn apart, which is the tragedy of Orpheus. He gets torn apart because he's not capable of moving on from his grief. He rejects community, even if it's in the form of frenetic women.
And because he reached for it he tried to grasp onto it so tightly, he had to experience her death twice.
Right.
Like, it doubled his pain and it doubled his mourning, right. And it made it impossible for him to move on.
He never came to grips with the fact that healing requires acceptance. Healing requires an integration of the tragedy in order to move on. There's a frailty to life that Orpheus just doesn't grasp, and that's like the tragedy of Orpheus.
And we can all see ourselves in him, right? Like we explored last week, how Hera is such a tragic figure, but we need to see that tragic example to avoid becoming it. Orpheus is the same way. We can all relate. Everyone who's lost somebody can relate to those feelings that Orpheus has, and that intense desire to offer yourself up in exchange, or to go to the ends of the earth, to cross the river Styx, to go through the underworld just to find and save your love. We have another example of a gender-swapped Orpheus and Eurydice story in YA literature, written by one of our great friends and colleagues, Dr. Deborah Crossland. And we were so lucky to interview her for this episode today. So here it is. I'm super excited. Today we have Dr. Deborah Crossland with us, and she is the author of The Quiet Part Out Loud, available now from Simon & Schuster Publishing, right? In paperback and hardback, I believe.
Yeah.
They're both out now. Oh!
I know, right? Fancy.
Oh my gosh. It's thrilling. It's thrilling.
I just ordered the hardcover for $10 from Amazon.
Yeah, they're super cheap on Amazon right now. Wow. Thank you for that, by the way.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, The Quiet Part Out Loud is a young adult novel by Dr. Deborah Crossland, mythologist extraordinaire, based on the Orpheus and Eurydice story. So we thought it was especially appropriate to have her on for this episode where we're talking about Orpheus and Eurydice. So Dr. Deb, would you like to introduce yourself and your experience with the story?
Well, I think you did a great job introducing me. I wrote this book during the pandemic. I had heard a song by J.P. Sachs. It was a song, If the World Was Ending, You'd Come Over Right. And it's about these two people who'd broken up and they obviously still had feelings for each other. And there was the tiniest of earthquakes in LA, and that got them thinking, like, oh my God, what if the world was ending? You know, we'd probably want to spend it together, right? But like, they wouldn't ask each other. They were just like, I might ask. And I was like, these two people just need to get over themselves and figure out that they want to be together forever. And I just got so obsessed with the song. And I was like, I could write a book about this. Like, this could be a totally, like, a good book. And I was in the middle of my dissertation when this happened, and a friend of mine was like, well, you need to stop writing your dissertation and write this book. And I was like, I don't think that's the way the dissertation thing works. And she's like, no, you got to do it. And so after a couple of months of being nagged every single day to write this book, I did. And I wrote it. It didn't take long. It just kind of, I think I wrote it in like 3 months. And then it was like ready to be sent out into the world. And all of my friends who are experienced authors were like, no, you have to like let it sit. You have to revise it. You have to do all this stuff with it. I was like, I feel like it's good. Like, it's not, I mean, it's going to obviously be revised during the process of being published. So I think it's good enough right now. And it was, because I picked up an agent and she sold it within a month after we signed together. And yeah, the rest was history. So.
And then she's been doing cool things like being on Good Morning America.
Yeah, that was pretty fun. There's a picture up there. My book was on the Jumbotron, which was really cool. But yeah.
That's so cool.
She's big time now, officially big time.
And the New York Times had me write an article for them, which was really cool.
So we're in the presence of greatness. Outside of this fabulous author's life, what else are you about?
I teach part-time. I teach English and mythology and at my local community college. And I work in the dual enrollment program, which is an outreach program to high school students, so they get credit for both high school and college at the same time. I taught high school for 10 years previously, and so I still speak teenager. Although it's getting harder these days with skibbity toilet and mid and riz and all kinds of fun words. But yeah, so I have fun doing that.
I've never felt more out of touch than listening to that slang.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
I had a feeling in my brain that I used to be cool once upon a time. But then I hear words like that, and I don't think that was ever true.
And I also started a garden. I'm sort of obsessed with gardening now, which
is it a secret garden?
I wish. That would be amazing. But no, alas.
Is it as good as the Duke's butt?
Close.
Mm-hmm. Caitlin, did you watch Bridgerton?
No, but I have seen his butt.
Oh,
sure.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I've seen the scene. I've seen the scene with his butt.
I'm learning to use like beans that grow and like use them as shade for some of the plants that can't have direct sun. I mean, it's just been pretty wild ride. But yeah, and I see little bees and I see like the little wasps that eat the aphids and stuff. I'm like, yes. And I used to run from them, and now I'm like, welcome to my land. My chives right now are all flowered, and the bees are just having a blast out there.
And doesn't your name mean bee?
Yeah. Busy as a bee in Hebrew. Yeah.
In Hebrew. So speaking of Hebrew, an ancient language, let's talk about this ancient myth.
What a segue.
Thank you.
I'm impressed.
That was pretty smooth.
It was. Randall's got riz.
So in The Quiet Part Out Loud, I want to be clear that when we're talking about the classical story of Orpheus and Eurydice, and then we're talking about different reinterpretations like Deb's book, The Quiet Part Out Loud, or like Netflix's Chaos, all of these characters are just inspired by the original story, and none of them are mirrors of the original story. So they're all different stories in their own right with a lot of different things going on. But what was it about Orpheus and Eurydice, Deb, that like stuck out to you? Out of all of the stories and all of the lands, what was it about Orpheus and Eurydice?
I think because it was during the pandemic and we all were going through this collective grief and a collective death of sort, that I started really grabbing onto that myth. For me, it was, most people focus on Orpheus, right? Most people focus on his journey and how he goes down into the underworld because he loses his, wife he just automatically fell in love with, and they just got married and they had all these plans, and then she dies. So it's all about him. And so I was like, what about Eurydice? What if she was fine down there? What if she was like, oh, I get to rest now? Like, she's chilling. Maybe she and Persephone play cards every Friday night. I don't know, like something.
I want to play cards on Fridays with Persephone and Eurydice.
Right.
That sounds great.
It'd be so great. Maybe we could invite Lilith. That'd be a real party.
Yes, please.
And Jezebel.
And Jezebel, two of my favorites.
Our girl Jez.
Ooh, I just started thinking, where's her autonomy? Where is her decision in all of this? And, at school, Dr. Chris Downing, when she talked about this myth, she talked about what if she made him turn around on purpose so she could go back, like that's, I don't know if you guys saw in the news yesterday, there was an 81-year-old woman who'd never voted before because her husband wouldn't let her. And he died last year. And so she voted for the first time in her life this year. And It's sort of got the same energy of, Eurydice, right? Like the only way she could protect herself is by forcing Orpheus to notice her in a way that would harm her, or, if we considered going to the underworld harmful, or, the end of life. And so I just got sort of obsessed with that. And then another component of the myth is what happens when they get outside? Like, how does life go on? Right. And I think we were all collectively struggling with that, where we were all turning inward, and this weird thing happened where we were all suddenly so connected on social media, and TikTok became a phenomenon. And, the videos people were putting out were so personal, and all of that societal mores and everything were just sort of stripped away. And we were just raw individuals, and it was okay suddenly to do that, right? And I think even now we feel the effects. Women are so over bras and putting on a ton of makeup every day and wearing high heels and pantyhose. We just don't anymore. And we sort of have this loop back to almost the 70s where everything is sort of natural, right?
Right, like this rediscovering of the goddess.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what happens in death, right? That's even in the hero's journey. When the hero goes into the underworld, half of that important time is him meeting with the goddess. And that's what happened. And so in The Quiet Part Out Loud, I swapped genders. I wanted Orpheus to, because Orpheus has the agency in the myth, I made that character a girl. And so I didn't give Eurydice the agency, but I gave a girl the agency in his place. And all through the book, she meets these different women who represent different aspects of the goddess, and they're expressed through popular faiths, especially in San Francisco. There's Christianity, of course, and I tried to portray the dual aspects of Christianity, where we have the mythology that exists within Christianity and the positive parts of it, but then all the active expressions that are so prevalent today and have become more prevalent today in our society, where the evangelical extremism shows. So I tried to portray both of those. There's some Buddhism expressions in there. There's Sikhism. There's all kinds of different aspects. And she learns from all of them. And then she eventually, hopefully, figures out something about herself.
Hopefully, right?
All the while in search for her love.
Yes. So I want to read a little snippet from the back. 5 months after the worst summer ever, Mia is still crashing at her best friend's dorm at San Francisco State, just a few miles away from the University of San Francisco, praying she never runs into the boy whose heart she broke. But Mia can't avoid fate forever. When their paths finally cross, Mia realizes she never should have let Alfie go. But just as they are about to reunite, a massive earthquake crushes San Francisco, and Mia finds herself racing across the rubble to find the ex she still loves before the rest of the city crumbles, taking one or both of them with it. Ooh, why do I feel like I'm about to cry?
Because you read it.
I know. I remember reading it and being so mad. I think I texted you in all caps. I knew exactly what's going to happen and I'm still furious.
Yeah.
Why is it so sad?
It's where I was. I lost my dad, my stepmom, and my grandpa within 3 months of each other during the pandemic. And not only was I experiencing the collective grief, but the grief of my own family. I'm the oldest person in my family now. Like, I lost all of my elders. They're all gone. It's a lot. It's a lot to deal with. And so I will tell you, and I will tell every reader, that as I was writing this book, I cried as much, if not more, than the people reading it, because I used to get made fun of because my family would come home and they'd be like, "Why are you crying at your computer?" I'm like, "This is just so sad." They're like, "You're writing it. Why are you doing that to yourself?" I'm like, "I don't know. It's therapy. Shut up."
Right? It's cathartic. And you bring up a good point. Like, why do we read these stories that we know are tragedies going into it, right? The story pattern that we have of Orpheus and Eurydice, it's not a new one. And yet we continue to engage with it, knowing how it's going to end, knowing that it's going to bring about this catharsis in us.
Well, and that's the thing, is our brains are wired for story, right? We experience story the same way we experience real life. If you hook up an MRI machine to somebody's head as they read a story or experience a story, the same areas light up as if it was happening to them in real time. And so it's a safe way to explore emotions that we don't often get to explore in ourselves with such honesty.
It's like an emotional inoculation.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it.
I've never thought of it in that way before, right? But you're like microdosing the scary stuff and you build up the anxiety and have a little bit of that fear response or adrenaline response or whatever it is that helps your body cope with it if and when that event does happen in your life, right? You're experiencing these things at a safe distance.
Absolutely. And, whatever exists in our own shadow realm that we're too afraid to face on, head on, is we can access bits of it through other stories. And it's cathartic for sure.
So I have a question about your book and Orpheus and Eurydice. So you brought up the hero's journey, and we talk about how in the hero's journey, which I'll link our discussion on the hero's journey and the heroine's journey in our show notes. We talk about how the hero's journey, part of it includes a return back to our home or our original society where we bring the boon or the treasure with us. Do you see your book as a hero's journey or a heroine's journey?
Definitely more of a hero's journey. Heroine journeys are more a reclamation of the feminine after succeeding in the hero's world for so long. And so this is more straightforward of the hero's journey. And yes, she does arrive back, but one of the great misteachings of the hero's journey is that we teach that it's a circle, and it is not. It's a spiral. And so even though you come back to where you might have been, you're never on the same plane. And so, you're doing this, right? That's why there's multiple hero journeys,
multiple heroes, multiple journees.
But in a person's lifetime, there's multiple journeys. I'm just going to say journeys. And they're all, sporadic. And so, yes, she does arrive back and she does have boon she brings with her, but she's changed. She's forever changed, and she's never going to fit into the community the same way. But neither does the hero. The hero comes back, and then it's their job to be a mentor, right? That's their new job.
Right. It keeps the cycle going.
But yeah, for sure.
Well, we were talking last week barely about the hero's journey and about Hera and how she's seen so traditionally as a villain, right? Having this failed hero's journey. Our conclusion is that she exists as a tragic figure, both victim and villain simultaneously, right? Like so many. And my stance is that she needs to stay that way as a tragic example of what happens to women under the patriarchy, right? Like when women have no lateral relationships trusted with other women, no vertical relationships one way or the other. There's just stories of abuse in both directions, you know, and she's married to her brother who continuously rapes her and other women, like, and she denies the call every single time where she has opportunities for the repair or to connect. She instead chooses to destroy.
Well, I think her story is a product of the patriarchal views of the time, right? Like Medusa, you know, it wasn't until modern day where people start considering Medusa as a victim. You know, she was always evil. And I think Hera as a victim works for sure because, yeah, she's thrust into this life she has to maintain, but also villain because she chooses power every single time. And it's a traditional model for the way patriarchal societies want women to behave. And we see it today, even, you know, why don't you just sit down and be quiet and, you know, make me a sandwich or, you know, smile and be pretty, take care of yourself and be here for my needs. And then when you don't do that, you're a bitch, right? Or you're a shrill, you're a shrew, God forbid you carry your own emotional baggage. I'll pack it for you if you like. But yeah, I think that's a good explanation of Hera.
I don't feel like we can change her story in the same way we can change Medusa's. Like Medusa has this like reclamation of power and autonomy and a boon in what appears to be a curse through the lens of the patriarchy. But even when applying different lenses to Hera's stories, like she's like a murderer and a...
Well, she has agency and Medusa doesn't. That's the difference. Because Medusa, all of these things happen to her, right? Mm-hmm. And some could argue that Athena gave her the snakes, gave her monstrosity as a gift so she would no longer have to deal with passers-by gods that are gross, and sends her to a cave to live her best life by herself with her sisters, right? And she has that outreach. And she never turns anyone to stone unless they come to kill her, right? And even
like she's
her
not
death,
seeking it out.
Never. And she can't help it. If somebody sees her, they make eye contact, they die, they turn to stone. And she's not actively doing that. It's still a passive gift. And she was killed in her sleep. Like she wasn't even allowed to fight back. But Hera has agency. She's given the choice multiple times and she chooses to stay that way. So there is the difference.
Tragic.
I haven't talked about myth in a long time.
I know. Great. Well, and one of the things that we talked about last week too was that, like, yeah, we can say that Hera doesn't have a choice, or that she has the choice multiple times and we see the choices that she's making, but also with somebody who was born into that situation and then had a life of repeated trauma over and over again, can they ever fully be expected to make any other decision? Is there even any choice there at all? Right. And that's like, I think why it's so important to not change Hera's story, because like that's the warning tale of what that looks like.
I mean, I know Maslow's hierarchy of needs is outdated now, but it still holds some reverence in that way, right? If those base needs aren't met, then how are you going to achieve higher individuation?
Everybody, again, this is Dr. Deborah Crossland, the author of the young adult book, The Quiet Part Out Loud, which we highly recommend that you go give a read. It's a young adult retelling of the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. Deb, again, thank you so much for sharing this time and this space with us. It was truly magical to hear your thoughts and be able to share in this discussion about myth and the magic of Orpheus and Eurydice.
All right. Thank you guys very much.
Nice to meet you.
Love you too.
Bye.
Bye.
Here's a question. Is Killian Scott actually attractive? Or is he just attractive because he's playing a hot, tattooed, mythic superstar?
So are you asking if Killian Scott is the attractive one, or if it's just Orpheus, the character that he's portraying?
I do like his crazy eyebrows.
I think personally, I'm more attracted to Orpheus.
I think so as well.
But I've never dated a guy like Orpheus.
Orpheus or Killian Scott?
No, like Orpheus. Like, I feel like one of the main issues that's communicated about Orpheus and Eurydice's relationship in Chaos is that Orpheus loves her too publicly and too loudly. Yeah. And that makes her uncomfortable and anxious. And I know that as a musician, like I find that attractive about his character for sure. But I don't know how I would feel on the receiving end of such big dramatic displays of love. I don't know if I would be open to something like that. I think it would make me just as uncomfortable as Riddy is in the show.
Sure.
So I don't know. I mean, I think I've always thought it would be great to be with a musician who writes songs about me, and that's like the dream, you know, but I don't know. But when I was in high school, I had a boyfriend. He wasn't a musician, but he was very poetic. And he like wrote me a letter about all the things he loved about me, like from my head to my toes.
Cute. But was it weird?
It was so weird because he sat me down and he read it to me, and I didn't know where to look and I didn't know what to do. And I just remember sitting on the stairs in his parents' house being 15 and him reading that letter to me out loud. And I think it was like 4 pages front and back. And it was hard for me to process that level of attention and focus and love. And I don't know, it makes me think of the Orpheus in Chaos, because the Orpheus in Chaos is doing these big, huge, grand gestures because he doesn't know how to like love her on the micro level.
Sure.
Right. He idolizes her. He worships her. He thinks that she's his muse. Right. And in the ancient Greek tradition, the muses aren't somebody that you're ever an equal with.
No.
Right? Like the muse inspires you. It flows through you. It's that divine inspiration. And oftentimes it reeks of sexual frustration because it's about the desire and the longing, and it never fully comes to fruition. And so Orpheus seeing Eurydice as his muse like is already a downfall.
I'd be insulted, I think.
If he wrote a song for you?
No, not if he wrote a song. Like, Luke's written me songs, but Luke also is like, loves me quietly. Like, he's more just like proud to be my partner. I mean, he wrote a song that he sang for me on her wedding day, which was really cute. And I like didn't expect it at all.
That's really sweet.
It was really sweet. I like cried really hard. But that felt different. He wouldn't do that, like, he wouldn't like sit me down and read me a poem looking directly in my eyes. Like, he would maybe put it in like a sweet card or something. But we've been together for over 10 years.
Well, so see, like, though, and that's like about meeting you where you're at and doing things to make you feel loved and supported. And I think the curse of Orpheus in Chaos is that he doesn't see his partner for who she really is and what she really needs. All he sees is his desires reflected back at him. He
wants to love her how he wants to love her and how he wants to be loved, I assume. And that's not mutualistic relationship.
Right. That's not a sustainable relationship in any way, shape, or form.
I agree.
It's an Icarus of a relationship.
Ooh, good.
Ooh.
Ooh, I like that comparison. It's a good one. Yeah, I think if I were ready, like, man, I would have like lost my shit at this guy on so many times for like not seeing me, not hearing me. I don't care how loud you love me. That's not love. You're obsessed with me.
It's a performance. It's a performance for everybody else. Like, what about when the lights are off and it's just us alone? Like, what happens then?
He's still trying to love her like he's a superstar.
Yeah, I take that back. I have dated an Orpheus.
All right.
Somebody who is tortured and emotional and musical, but also performative about their love, and more performative in front of other people than when it's just the two of us. And it didn't last. It didn't last very long.
Because that's not love. I don't want to be like, I want my partners to be proud of me and proud to be my partner, but I don't want that. I don't want to be like some muse. I'm more than that. Like, I'm more than
a muse.
More than a muse. I'm more than just some cishet white guy's like inspiration for his next song, right? Even though his song would probably be like, she crazy, she needs to brush her hair, like she takes her dog everywhere, you know, like.
Oh, and it rhymes. Hell yeah.
Right.
She's crazy, she needs to brush her hair, and she takes that damn dog everywhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, great question. Great question.
Yeah, because I keep like, I mean, this is really maybe a weird thing to say. Like, I think his acne scarring and pockmarks is really attractive to me. Like, the imperfection of his skin, I'm like here for it.
Yeah, this is definitely a situation where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. When you say that, right? Like, individually, that
right.
That wouldn't necessarily be like a yes.
Right.
An immediate green flag.
It's hot though. I like appreciate it.
I don't think I would like be interested in someone who's a professional actor, that lifestyle, that everything. No. I mean, nothing to say anything personal about them, just that lifestyle is not compatible with the lifestyle that I want at this stage of my life. Not that the lifestyle of a rock star is anything better. Like I want, but there's a specific solidarity and creative expression that I find like is definitely different with a musician.
Yeah, that's something. I don't want to say I'm a private person, but I am pretty introverted and do like my space. And I feel like when I've
do MySpace, you're still on there?
Is MySpace still like a
I don't
thing?
think so. I think they finally took it down.
I wouldn't like my life. I want to advertise my life on my own terms, not because I'm like dating a rock star or being a rock star.
Yeah, that has to be really difficult. It's something, this is a journey that I've been on recently. It started last year. I sing in a couple of different like small choirs. This is the Orpheus episode, so here we go. Mm-hmm. All about performing. I sing with a few different choirs, and when I first joined, I was embarrassed to invite people to the show because it's not a professional show. Like it's an amateur, right? Like, I mean, everybody's great, but like it's not a professional quality production. Of course, it's not like it's a community show choir vocal ensemble.
I want to come.
It's so fun. But it's so fun. And like, I finally just recently realized like what I was finally able to unpack what I've been taught my whole life. And what I've been taught my whole life is there's no use in doing something if you're not the best at it. Sure. And I was even taught like as a performer when I was younger, I was trying to get more comfortable harmonizing and learning how to harmonize as a vocalist. And my parents told me that there's no point in learning how to harmonize because I should always be singing the lead. I'm just recently learning to find joy in being imperfect and just do things for the joy of them and for the creative expression of them. And I don't know, I was raised with this really like Ricky Bobby mentality. If you're not first, you're last. And there's like no middle ground. I think that is totally stupid. Sorry. For me personally, I'm going to make a value judgment there. Like, that's not what I want to teach my child. That's not the world I want to live in.
Oh, sweet baby Jesus.
Sweet little baby Jesus. The cutest of all the Jesuses. And his tiny little manger.
No, I think that's like really fair. You remember Alien Overlord guy that I dated?
Oh, yes. I was like,
he was
I don't remember that
part. He like was like famous. Like he went on tour with a bunch of bands that I've like listened to my whole life and like was a really talented musician. And I was like feeling terrible about myself because I gave up performing and really just now play music when I feel like it. And I've like definitely lost skill because I don't like actively play every day or whatever. And I like couldn't even read any of the sheet music that I used to read anymore if I pulled it up now. But I also like, I feel glad about that in some regards. I get frustrated when I like can't hit the note right. But like, I like it much better that way. I like not having the looming expectation of perfection because I don't think that's like the whole point of music and art, that the perfection is the imperfection.
Yeah, the flaws are the perfection. Absolutely.
Exactly.
It's like what makes it human. And so often we as performers, when we think we're performing the worst, when we're super emotional or we're crying or our voice is cracking, like that's when people in the audience connect with it the most, when we feel like at our most raw and most vulnerable. And there's something magic about that for me. And there's something really attractive for me about a person who like puts themselves out there on stage. And I'm sure that's just a lot of that's like respect coming from me, like knowing what it takes to get up there, knowing what it takes to be a musician and perform in front of a crowd that you don't know how, you never know how it's going to go.
Exactly. So Randall and I know that we promised everybody that we would be doing our own cover of the song Eurydice, sung by Killian Scott / Orpheus in Chaos. And as it turns out, both of us got pretty sick this past week. And so we didn't get around to recording the song, but we promise that we will get around to doing it in the future. So just hang tight, and thank you for understanding.
Thanks for joining us, everybody, on this episode of The Mything Link.
I'm Randall.
I'm Caitlin.
And we will see you next week. Goodbye. Thanks for listening to The Mything Link. You can find the reference list in the show notes for further research. The Mything Link is researched and recorded by Drs. Randall Oliate and Caitlin Curry. Edited by Dr. Caitlin Curry. With music by Mark Austin Kelton. The Mything Link is produced by Fernway Collective Incorporated, a humanities nonprofit based in San Diego, California. As a small nonprofit, we appreciate if you have the time to leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts to help grow our audience. For more information on our organization, head over to fernwaycollective.org. Thanks for listening.
There she blows.